nations like Kenya, Tunisia, Egypt, Namibia, Tanzania, South Africa, Morocco, and others' efforts to improve the crisis. Kenya says it is set to deepen its cooperation, particularly in the fields of nuclear and renewable energy, infrastructure, and education, to avert the nation's electricity and energy crisis. Indeed, the Kenyan ambassador to Russia, Peter Matuki, highlighted the potential for collaboration in these areas, emphasizing the mutual benefits that could be realized through strengthened ties. Kenya is looking forward to improving the capacity of power production, actually going towards more green energy. Ambassador Mutuki said during an interview last week. Participants gathered at the inaugural Africa Energy Expo 2024 in Kigali, Rwanda, where they called for sustainable energy solutions across the African continent to power its future. The three-day event gathered government officials, regulators, industry leaders, and energy experts under the theme Investment, Integration, Infrastructure, and Governance to fuel the energy transition. There is indeed an increased need to tackle Africa's energy challenges while advancing the continent's goals under the Africa Power Vision and Sustainable Development Goal 7, which focuses on affordable and clean energy. Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to today's edition of Talking Points, where we shall be discussing collaborative solutions to overcoming Africa's energy crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome. Stay with us. It's a new day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for always trusting your Pan-African channel, For You Media Africa. And of course, the program on air is Talking Point, where you're watching us, and For You are television, listening to us over the airways of FM 96.3, For You Radio, and of course on our social media platforms. Meanwhile, like we mentioned in our preamble, today we're discussing Africa's energy crisis. We're looking at collaborative solutions to overcome this deadlock. And of course, to discuss this topic of discussion this day, I'm being joined by Dr. STANLEY, FONGOD, agripreneur, Pan-Africanist, and the CEO of CROSTON FINTECH. I thank you immensely, sir, for joining us this day.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me, and I hope that today we'll have a fruitful conversation. And thank everyone who has tuned in into this program. I hope they will have some value out of this as well.
Hopefully, and of course, we shall be joined by FELIX ORWAKA, co-chair of Kenya Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security. We shall be tuning in all the way from Kenya. Now, to debut today's conversation, without further ado, Dr. FONGOD. Now, when you look at Africa's energy crisis, it's true that over the years it's been facing numerous challenges. This part efforts by several countries, which we cited, like Kenya, South Africa, Morocco, Namibia, and others, to overcome or overturn this challenge. So how do you assess Africa's energy crisis as it stands, despite the numerous efforts?
I think presently we do not really fully grasp how deficient we are as a continent so far as energy is concerned. And I think the reason for that is because we have not gotten ourselves in the area of industrialization that we need to get into. So there are energy issues arises just from, just urbanization with our increased population that has basically put a heavy burden on our energy sources. That is the primary problems that we are facing as a continent. Once we get into the phase of industrialization the way we're supposed to, manufacturing, then there will absolutely be need for us to do more than what we are currently doing. The continent is in trouble, and we need to be able to make sure that we have many sources of energy, whether it be nuclear or we basically revamped whatever sources we have so far as hydroelectricity power is concerned, and find ways where we can also use some renewable sources of energy, whether that be wind, whether that be geothermal, whatever method that we are able to find that will serve us well on the continent of Africa while making sure that the environment is protected. That will be what we need. But as far as energy, the energy energy mandate on the continent is concerned, I think that we must fight to make sure that energy is available. Unfortunately, it's not. If you look across the continent, and if you look at places like Ghana, with the CROSTON Dam in Ghana, which is a great monument as it stands, because there's really nothing else that that dam is offering, because it's never absolutely met up to its original concept and demand. If you look in places like Egypt and what is happening with the Nile, which is quite shameful, because some of our great artifacts, have literally been lost to history as a result of the dams that have been created along the Nile. We have to find ways in which we create a balance between energy and preservation, and also conservation, that we make sure that what is African, what is good to us, what is our heritage, those are protected in our pursuit for energy. So there has to be that dynamics between what we are getting and what we have.
Exactly, and of course, I was citing the Africa Energy Expo that touched areas of energy across the African continent, and it was imperative that panelists did mention that there was this need for Africa to explore alternative renewable energy sources like wind, like solar energy, and of course, it was important to ensure that there is electrification at the level of local or remote communities. Now, we are citing this, and at this point in time, through what approaches can Africa be able to close this gap, this energy gap that does exist on the African continent?
Well, I think that we really need to do a lot of investing, and we have to put money where, we need to put money, and that will probably be, for now, in while we are talking about other energy sources like wind and geothermal, solar energy panels. I think that we need to start looking a little bit deeply into hydro. There are so many, because of the topography of the continent of Africa and just the sheer nature of the continent itself, we rise rapidly when you leave the sea levels, and as you leave the sea and you go inland, you rise rapidly. All right, so which is quite good, because that means that we have a lot of waterfalls and along the way, as waters basically run from inland into the ocean. There are a series of waterfalls that we can absolutely be able to use, but we also need to be able to make sure that there are studies done that will be able to help make sure that there's some kind of preservation, to wildlife, because the only thing that basically keeps us apart from the rest of the world is that our wildlife is still quite pristine. We still have a lot of virgin land, despite the fact that we are cutting timber like there's no tomorrow in places like Cameroon, but we still have a lot of virgin land, and we have to be able to preserve that, because that is what makes us who we are as a continent. And secondly, if we're able to harness the power of this series of waterfalls, if we look at a river like the Congo River, it is a series of waterfalls running across the Congo River, and that's why it's not navigable by ships or boats, because of just the nature of the river. We can actually be able to harness that. I think that one of the rivers that has produced a lot of electricity for the African continent is actually the Congo River. We might need to be able to double that size, just so that we can be able to use what we have to distribute energy across the continent. Secondly, I think that nations on the continent of Africa should start looking deeply on how they can be able to harness what they have and be able to sell throughout the continent, rather than just setting up something that is maker to take care of their own population, which really does not even work anyway. But we have to find ways in which whatever energy we are deriving from sources like hydroelectricity power structures or dams, we need to be able to make sure that they're large enough to be able to at least take care of our neighbors on the continent.
Exactly, and you cited very key points like Africa or African nations harnessing the potential which they have for the benefit of the African continent, a point that was re-echoed by a Rwandan minister, where he cited that it's imperative for Africa to write its own history. It's imperative for Africa to bring out or tell the positive story about the African continent, because so far it's just been a negative coverage on the African continent. But away from that, You cited that looking at the Congo River is imperative for Africa to have numerous sources so as to say power communities and of course go a long way in closing this energy gap that does exist within the African continent. I would like to reiterate that some of the key topics that have been on several occasions brought to the table as far as this very topic on energy is concerned is the need for resilient infrastructures within the continent of Africa so as they can interconnect grids within the continent and establish some sort of a successful public-private partnership. But when you look at the continent of Africa today, we are discussing the need for collaboration to solve this problem. How does that go, and what parameters need to be put in place to ensure that collaboration within African countries actually could bring about this positive change which we are talking about?
Well, this is, look, energy is as important as anything else to any civilization. I think from the very early days of people like Benjamin Franklin, Michael Faraday, working and discovering energy back in the 17th century, I think, and then to the early 19th centuries when you started having people like Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison, doing a lot of work in terms of the application of energy to where we are right now. There has been an increased revolution in the world. In terms of technology, most of what we have today and what we had in the past is all based on energy. I can now say, clearly that energy actually empowered the civilizations we had in the past. It's empowering the civilization we have today, and it will empower the civilizations we have tomorrow. What that means is this: that almost everything about our lives is powered by energy. Your cell phone technology, cell phone towers is empowered by energy. All these communication devices that we have is all empowered by energy. Even the cars that you're using is empowered by energy, but that energy is fossil fuel, it's petrol, it's gas. And while we are dealing with electricity power, the reality is that we are gradually moving to a place where electricity will become the most dominant form of energy. And I think it is the most dominant form of energy as we speak, except that you're living in some third world country where we are still dealing a lot with gas and petrol, because we need to burn things up just to generate energy, especially in places like Nigeria, where you have 1 billion generators sounding off every single night just to power the night sky. We have to be able to make sure that we understand this and then do whatever it takes to be able to have some kind of a coalition, have policies in place that will help the African fully become energy independent. And the reason for that is because there are so many areas of our lives that we need to improve. Are we talking about healthcare? There are hospitals that cannot function properly if there's no energy. We are talking about, in terms of the laboratory section, we are talking about, whether you're dealing with ecography, you're dealing with X-ray technology, whatever you're doing, every single thing is rises and falls on energy. We have to make sure that energy is available on the continent, and this means there has to be gross collaboration, between nations, and areas where we have abundance of energy. We can now be able to share that to other areas, that is lacking in energy. There are areas that are suitable for solar panel, constructions. We can set up those solar panels farms, solar energy farms, and then be able to use that and feed communities. For example, if you have local communities, there's no need for them actually to be on the grid. There's no need for that, except that they are farm enough to be able to start, selling excess energy, to the grid. But if not, why not have local communities, build up, that are in the interlands, build up their own energy sources, based primarily in some areas, deal with solar energy farms, so that they can be able to take care of their villages and their communities. I think that we really need to do this. There has to be gross collaboration. This is not. This is a crisis that we need to address, because the reality is, if we don't, then we're talking about areas of education. You're talking about agricultural productivity. We are talking about technological innovations. All of these things will fall to the ground, because we really must be able to have energy. Nothing works without energy.
Indeed, which is in line with the recent decision by the Kenyan government to be able to power every household, which is a project with electricity in the East African country. Now, moving forward, still in line with this issue of public-private partnerships on the African continent, when you look at the case of South Africa, for instance, you notice that it had been, President Cyril Ramaphosa had stated that the government could not do all the work while calling on, private institutions to be able to put hand on deck for them to be able to see how they could overturn the country's energy crisis, which was earlier on reiterated by the nation's energy minister. Now, in that light, when you look at partnerships, public-private partnerships, that is the government and these private institutions in various nations, how important is such a partnership in overturning the crisis which Africa is dealing with? Because at this point in time, we might be looking at collaborative solutions, but it doesn't just remain, it's not just left for the government to be able to address such a problem. I think it's something that it could be done through collective effort. So bringing in a public and private partners, how could this go a long way in overturning or averting the energy crisis on the African continent?
For sure, I think that the PPPs, program should be able to do a lot more help so far as the continent is concerned. I do believe that we have to do whatever it takes to make sure that we bring in companies that have the capacity or that is working in the field of energy to be able to set some kind of a collaborative effort within these different African countries and see how we can be able to use what these countries do have to create the energy that the countries need. And I think that this public-private partnership initiatives, it's absolutely useful, they are needed, and we need to be able to expand it everywhere we can so far as the continent is concerned. And here are the reasons why. First of all, if you have a company that has a skill set that is into making money in this particular space, that means that they have what it takes, they have the expertise to be able to set up these systems and do so efficiently than the government will ever be able to do. There is this strange idea that somehow the government knows what to do. I came to tell you absolutely the government has absolutely no idea on a lot of things. All right, the government is just this machine that runs things, and they have been proven to run things inefficiently. Some of the greatest waste I have seen in my life has come from what government does. All right, so you have to be able to have these public-private partnership where the one puts another in check, and they are able to build robust systems that will help generate electricity, for communities and whatnot for a nation. We have that here in the United States, and so the energy grid in America it's basically privately owned, even though the government has a lot of input, but most of them is privately owned, and everybody generates electricity and contribute into the grid. All right, there are people with their private solar energy farms, and they farm this. They have these farms, set up these farms, and they generate the electricity they generate. They just, pipe that into the grid, and they get paid like that. We need to be able to have that level of initiative on the continent of Africa. You can be able to set up your own solar energy farm. There's nothing else that stops you from doing that. Once you have the money and you have the capacity to, you should be able to set up your own solar energy farms. Why not in communities where there's no electricity, and just distribute power to the people and charge them for it? That's how it's done out here in the West, and there's no reason why we should not be able to employ those techniques on the continent of Africa and make sure that our people become energy independent.
Absolutely, and that reduces the dependence on the government and just in that light. Now, we're looking at Africa, and of course, you said the government cannot do everything, but then it remains at the level of robust policy frameworks. Now, how imperative is it for Africa to have such policy frameworks within the African continent so as to leverage the Africa single electricity market while emphasizing the need for regional cooperation amongst partners? Like you said earlier, it's left for, countries within a sub-region on the African continent to be able to put hands together for them to be able to attain their set objectives, and of course the need for them to integrate each other for it, because we know it's crucial for establishing a sustainable energy market within the African continent. So How effective, how imperative would it for Africa to have sort of a robust or strong policy framework within the African continent that could boost integration and, of course, collaboration amongst regional partners?
Well, look, that's great, and I think that we need to be able to find ways in which we can approach this from a regional perspective. That being said, let me probably correct this a little bit. When I said that the governments do not know, they can't get anything done, it's not that they should not get things done. It's just that when you show up in any country and you basically go, for example, to the Ministry of Energy or whatever it's called in any country, be it in agriculture, be it in anything, you have all these intellectual ideologues who sit in offices with bunch of papers out on their table and then telling you they are Dr. so-and-so or they graduated from this prestigious university on the African continent, they came out of this, they are engineered this, and the reality is that they have never set foot in any factory, they have never walked in the field any day of their lives. So you have somebody who is an engineer who basically does not fully understand or who have never constructed anything. So those are the kind of individuals that basically are useless to the country. They just sit in these offices and they just pride themselves by saying, I'm a minister of this and whatnot. Just pure junk and garbage. What I was saying is we need to be able to make sure that we bring in the people who are doing what they say they do. All right. So in terms of energy, you bring in folks who are basically setting up these systems to create this partnership so that while those boys sit in the offices and they pride themselves in how glorious and how wonderful and all their titles, the folks who have the capacity to be able to do the work gets in and then get the job done. Those guys can sit over there and think about policies while these guys are basically thinking on how they can be able to build something that is that is efficient, cost effective, rather than just throwing in money on to their cronies and their friends that will not be able to generate the kind of power that we need. That being said, I think that we need to approach the issues of energy on the continent of Africa from a region by region basis. And I think that, for example, if you look at a bloc, the Western bloc like ECOWAS, there has to be a way in which that bloc becomes energy independent, which means that if you scan from Cameroon all the way to places like Senegal, all right, Mauritania, there has to be a way in which, Liberia and all those countries, there has to be a way in which we figure out how can we become energy independent in this bloc. What do we have in this bloc? The Sahel is there. We understand that the Sahel has a lot of, flatlands that is very good for wind, for solar energy and also for wind energy. How do we harness that and distribute that across the region? Number two, we also know that there are some dams, there are some rivers in that part of the world that has the capacity to generate electricity, especially starting from places like Cameroon. There are great waterfalls in places like Cameroon that can be used to generate electricity that will probably do much good, so far as the West Africa is concerned, at least be able to support Nigeria, in terms of the energy grid. How can we be able to harness that and then sell that, to the rest of West Africa? We need to be able to create these partnerships, without which it will be increasingly difficult as the population grows, as some form of industrialization comes in, the demand for energy increases, meanwhile the grid remains the same. You see, when we talk about energy crisis on the continent of Africa, it's not because the infrastructure is the problem. No, the infrastructure has not just changed. The infrastructure has remained the same, meanwhile the population has grown. When I grew up, every single household in the village that I grew up out of, I could literally count how many people had televisions. We had one particular individual that actually had a refrigerator, and that was the guy selling the fish. All right, he had the cold store selling, fish and some other co-products, but that was it. All right, now every single person in the population in my village has grown. Every single person in my village has a refrigerator. Every person has a television, and everyone is using the fan. There's air conditions everywhere. That is a lot of energy. That is a lot of energy demand on the same infrastructure that hasn't changed. And as a result of that, we have blackouts every single day because we have infrastructure that has not grown with the population and with the demand. We have to find ways in which we increase on the infrastructure, we build infrastructures that will support the growth in population and the growth in demand for energy. And secondly, we must also make sure that we diversify our energy sources. And the reason for that is obvious. This particular model of depending on hydro, which has been the mode of operation on the continent of Africa, will not be sustainable. We must make sure that we diversify. And why not get into nuclear? Why not us on the continent of Africa start talking about nuclear energy? We have uranium. We have the energy sources for nuclear energy on the continent of Africa in abundance. Why are we still talking about the fact that we have energy crisis on the continent when we have what it takes to be able to set that stuff up? And I don't think that we need to be talking to anybody else so far as building, these energy sources on the continent of Africa is concerned. We need to be able to do it, without trying to be able to figure out who is going to approve and not approve of this thing. We have to be able to do it. That is absolutely necessary. You have countries like France, all right, with hundreds of nuclear energy plants supplying energy to everywhere and collecting Africans' uranium from the Sahel and basically being energy independent and selling energy to her neighbors. And yet those of us on the African continent, we are still moving around with our bush lamps. You know what the bush lamp, the lantern. We are still moving around with our lanterns and bush lamps because we just can't be able to keep up with the growth demands and the same level of energy that we have been receiving, for the last 4 or 5 decades. We have to be able to do some changes. Some things really needs to change, and we must be able to build up a robust system so far as energy is concerned on the continent.
Exactly, and that is the core. Africa needs to build a robust systems within the continent of Africa so as to avert its energy crisis. We just got indications. We've been joined by Felix ORWAKA, co-chair of Kenya Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security, who is joining us all the way from Kenya. Thank you, Masley, sir, for joining us this day.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
It's a pleasure to have you. And I was discussing with your co-panelist, Dr. FONGOD, just now about the policy frameworks that could be put in place by various stakeholders within the African continent to be able to further regulate this issue of the energy crisis on the African continent. And of course, you're Kenyan, and just recently we saw the Kenyan ambassador to Russia that stated that the country plans to electrify each household within Kenya during a specific period of time. But in line with that, I was asking your co-panelists, there is this call for African leaders at a regional basis to be able to collaborate and for a public-private sector partnership for them to be able to bring on the table a strong policies that could be able to solve this problem. But nonetheless, how effective would it be for effective regulatory frameworks to be put in place within the continent of Africa, be it at the level of regions or from country to country, to be able to attract private investors within the sector, like to clean energy projects alongside capacity building initiatives within the continent of Africa, so as to support a local entrepreneurship within the sector?
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm so much grateful today to just have this cool conversation. First and foremost, what I want to say is that Africa as a continent, we are not doing bad in terms of energy, because we have the capacity and potential to work on our energy without even getting the outside world support. And then I'm really happy that my co-panelists have just shared that issue of policy framework. I think dependency rate of Africa is whatever is making Africa to look as if we are poor. We don't focus on our internal strength. And when you look on the sector of energy, what do you think if the African country can today merge together and create a great solar panels to maximize on the solar energy so that we can be able to address our issues? If you see today, Morocco is one of the leading countries that has created one of the biggest solar panels when it comes to harvesting the solar energy and transferring to other forms of energy. I want to say that technology, just as my co-panelists have stated, Kenya is growing very quick, just as any other country in Africa. And in African countries, there's a high demand of new technologies. And if you check very clearly, new technologies needs or consumes a lot of energy. But these energies, we can only bring them by ourselves. Let me say example. We have one of the greatest rivers, greatest dams, greatest water bodies within Africa, which can enable us to tabulate the engines so that we can be able to produce our own energy. So when you speak about energy, I think what we are looking for from other country, and our president Kenya just brought the issue of Russia because of one thing. They are bringing Russia on board not for the purpose of coming up with new energy system. We have the energy system, but Russia now is coming now to help with the issue of poles. The poles that are going to be used so that every household has the electricity, electrical wires that are going to be made so that Kenya to have it. But if you check this framework, don't you think that we have African countries who are able to do that? Because the materials that are being used to make the copper wires, they are being mined in Africa. How best can we now utilize the Pan-Africanism character by reinvesting in ourselves? The creative, innovative young people within our African continent, they are able to run the solar panels. How best can we create more solar panels in different areas to support the agricultural sector, to support the other sectors that can enable us to pay our bills? Like, let me tell you today, the cost of electricity in these countries is very expensive. The energy cost is very high, and yet some of them we are able to address it. So how do you know how this thing happened? This thing happened with a double tendering nature of our countries. So you find a government is able to have a small committee to handle this, but they now, instead of them working internally, they give out tender to other external companies. Kenya, we are crying today. Adani has been given the tender of supplying energy within our country. Russia is coming again on board. Now, these are two people who are coming on board in the name of supporting the issue of energy and fueling and everything. But what are we checking? We're not checking on the long-term effects of whatever we are going into. Let me give example. Kenya is going to sign a treaty of 30 years receiving supply or managing our energy sector by Adani company. Imagine in the next 30 years, how many things will have grown or developed within the African continent. Don't you think in the next 30 years, one of the African countries will have the capacity to supply us with this? Don't you think in the next 30 years, with the issue of climate change, which is rapidly increasing, making us to receive a lot of sun rays, more than the capacity which we usually receive? Why can't we utilize the climate change effects and now use it to also respond back? We are supposed to focus in an alternative way of getting energy as Africa continent, and we are supposed now to focus on how best can we now help ourselves in the issue of energy, because this is not a small issue. I'm telling you, it's very expensive. I'm telling you, if you go to South Africa, a lot of people are crying with the bills of electricity. Leave alone South Africa. Our friends have here in Ethiopia, they're paying a lot of money. You will find that one unit in Kenya goes for $1. 1 unit in Kenya goes for $1, and 1 unit in Kenya can take you even for a full day if you are operating normally. So that means that somebody who is earning a small amount of money uses $30 in a month to get energy. Imagine of that young person who is running an entrepreneurial activity or shop, or let's say he wants to start a bakery company of that person. He will spend a lot of money on energy than even on anything when it comes to the issue of calculation of its profit. So the issue of approach, and I will always say this: the African Union is the umbrella that harmonizes the policies and framework within Africa as a continent. What are they doing to ensure that African partner with fellow African countries and encourage bilateral engagement through opening ways that if you know there is a country within Africa who can produce a high number of energy, they can now use that country to supply to other countries, then them also get something in return from the countries that they're supplying energy from. So with the technology that we are going to see, we need a lot of inclusion in this policy framework, and we want a policy framework that maximizes on the solar energy more than any other forms of energy that we need in our country. Despite we know that we may not survive with only solar energy, but now let this be a culture that can enable us to grow as Africa. There are a lot of millions of money that we are spending in the external forces towards developing Africa. We can use it towards each other. We can get something from Cameroon. We can get something from South Africa. We can get something from Morocco. Then how do we now bring them together so that we can use whatever we have as Africa to address our Africa issues? Yeah, so I think the frameworks that we have, and also Kenya, I think we are supposed to look this issue on the long-term run, not the political run. You know, now when we speak of Kenya, sometimes we only see our political leaders, they want to solve problem for the houses, but is it durable? So imagine an household is able to get electricity, but not able to get money to pay for the bill. Then what is that alternative that you can give to this person not to feel overburdened? Remember, solar panel, this person can buy once. Then he will depend on the solar energy to maybe ignite his house or maybe to use in his normal operation. But remember, electricity, without token, he cannot access it. So what are we doing to those people who are living in under-resourced society? Those people who are living even with below $1 a day? How will they feel part and parcel of the revolution growth that we have? That can only happen if we know that we Africans, we have a policy that enables us to support each other in our strengths and also look on how we can build other African countries in their weaknesses. And that will have a holistic approach towards the energy issue in Africa as a continent.
Exactly, and that aligns with the need for inclusion, the need for collaboration within the African continent. I'll stay with you, Felix. Now, that re-echoes the statement made by the ambassador of Kenya to Russia, that where he said there is so much negative coverage on the African continent or about the African continent, calling on African stakeholders, calling on Africans to be able to participate in positively, given the image or portraying the image of the African continent to the rest of the world. Now, you mentioned that at this point in time we have COP29 that is taking place all the way there in Baku, Azerbaijan, where we have seen leaders so far calling on global reforms, calling on intensified global action against climate change. And this is in relation with the energy crisis which the world is facing, most especially the African continent. And we know Africa sometimes pays for what it does not participate in. With these energy crisis plaguing the African continent, how does this call for global action as far as climate change is concerned, given that Kenya, for instance, happens to be one of those countries within the East African sub-region that have been dealing with the impacts of climate change? How does this relate with the energy crisis which Africa is facing?
Thank you so much. So one thing which I want to say is that let me be so much self-centered. We are not supposed to call for global approach. We are supposed to call from the country's approach. They're supposed to call for the action from the country level. So from the country level, we go to the regional level. We are from East Africa. So the East Africa, what is it that is in there that can enable us to address this issue before running to global aspect? What is it that is in our continent before running for the global aspect? So
I believe we have some disturbances at the level of internet connection or connectivity with you, Felix, but hopefully you're going to get back to us, and I'll be proceeding with Dr. Fongod, while hoping that we have some sort of smooth transition connecting us here in the studio and you there in Kenya. Meanwhile, Dr. Fongod, I was asking your co-panelists at this point in time when the world is focusing on COP29 that is taking place all the way there in Azerbaijan. We have been this call for global action, this call for Africans, or better still, intensified global action against climate change. And I was asking, how does this relate with the energy crisis on the African continent, given that Africa sometimes gets to pay, whereas it has less or little or less gas emissions coming all the way from Africa? Please, can you? Yes, I can hear you. Please proceed.
Okay. So I was saying that, in more ways, this is one of the biggest scam that it's been pushed down the throats of Africans, that the rest of the world got through their, industrialization using energy. Now that it's Africa's turn, we start talking about all kinds of global energy issue, climate change, and whatever stuff that we want to call it. I'm not a climate denier, but I am somebody who is quite objective, and I think that we need to think about this thing a little bit thoroughly. Once upon a time, the Sahara used to be a savanna. All right, right deep into the Sahara, it was pure savanna, teeming with wildlife. What happened? I don't think that we should be able to start talking about a lot of things so far as energy is concerned, so far as Africa is concerned. We must be able to think a little bit deeply about what benefits the African first before we enthrone ourselves into conventions which China is not respecting, and which some parts of the United States is respecting, but China for sure, which is the greatest emitter in the world, will not respect. So we on the African continent need to start finding ways in which we do what is good for us as Africans. There are about 1.5 billion people on the African continent. 600 million of us on the continent of Africa, we have almost zero access to electricity. Think about it, 600 million Africans, especially, and a huge part of this bulk is in sub-Saharan Africa. A lot of folks in sub-Saharan Africa do not have access to electricity. How do we solve these issues? I am a big proponent that we must basically address these particular issues on energy community by community. I don't think that a blanketed approach will be able to help us, except in cases where we are beside huge energy sources, maybe a dam, or maybe somebody is setting up an energy source that is like renewable energy source, maybe a wind farm that is big enough to be able to sustain a whole entire community. But with that, which we must approach this thing village by village, community by community, so that we can be able to get people in the interlands, people in remote villages on the African continent, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, to become energy independent. And I think that is useful. If we are talking about bringing some kind of a globalization, if we are talking about getting young Africans to work, if we are talking about finding ways in which people in remote areas of the continent of Africa can be able to sell whatever stuff that they're producing online, which is basically where everybody is now. If you are talking about young people to be able to have access to education, where they are learning things by themselves on some e-learning platforms, those e-learning platforms will be useless without energy. Energy is needful, energy is useful. So we have to be able to find ways in which we set up energy sources within these communities and bring these communities to become energy independent. Meanwhile, we are waiting for these communities to eventually join the grid. We have to be able to bring energy sources to them long before they join the grid, because that is the only way in which we close the gap and get everyone on the continent of Africa to have access to electricity. I think that should be the framework in which we follow. We can no longer just sit and believe and hope and pray that we're going to one day have this massive, overhaul of our infrastructure and then bring everybody else on board. No, I think that we need to go to where folks are desperately in need of power, provide them the power that they need at a village level, at a local level, and allow them to have uninterrupted power with robust solar energy systems, retrofit that with windmill technology, and whatever is in that particular environment that we can find, and allow those in that environment to begin to enjoy the luxury of living well and have their hospitals, over there, have energy as well, so that they can be able to participate in surgeries and do other forms of treatment that requires energy, either in the area of testing to see whatever is happening with their bodies, rather than having very sick people to travel over long distances on, through very bad roads to go and get some kind of treatment in the cities, at the risk of them dying just from delay and the transportation itself. So we have to find ways in which we do this on a local basis, on a village to village basis, rather than waiting for some overall of the entire electrification grid.
Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD, for your brilliant insights as far as that question is concerned, and of course the topic of discussion. Meanwhile, if we've got Felix ORWAKA with us, Felix, please, could you proceed with what you have to say as far as how it relates the energy crisis between Kenya and, of course, the energy crisis on the African continent?
Yeah, so I think I will echo just back what my co-panelists have stated. We need to address this thing home. Let's stop running from the reality. We have the possibility and the potential to address this issue as a continent, and this depends with the member states' mandates and interest. The issue of bringing the global together, and we know that the global south is always being used for rubber stamping. Sometimes I don't want to get to this angle, but I'm just trying to ask, why are you bringing problem to us which is not our problem? If you check the issue of climate change, Africa has the smallest percentage. Michael Panis has just stated that China had one of the biggest main causes of these issues. Why are they now saying that they want to help us to address these issues? The issue of plastics, the increase in plastic consumption in Africa is due to the high increase in importation of plastic products from China, from the Japan industry. How do we now speak of the issue of energy into a space that we know that these people has the potential to do it? A lot of people do not have access to energy and also electricity, and we know this one has affected the entire growth. We would love to hear stories by the global north and global everywhere trying to say that we want to maximize on the use of the solar panels. I'm so much big in advocating of using of the solar panels as a source of energy to people's houses, because I've just said that solar panel you can buy once and it will be yours forever, and we are going to get the energy. But these other energy methods, they need subscription, which might be so much costing or very costly to that person who is not able to get something. Let's not speak of those people who are able to get maybe $5 salary a day. Let's speak of those who don't have that $1 salary a day, and they need this electricity for their normal days to continue. Kids, we want to promote the education sector, so that means we need a lot of support whenever when it comes to the issue of of energy, so that young people can learn about ICT, young children can learn about computer at an early stage. They can have the digital skills education. But wow, how are you doing this? So for me, I think one thing, African Union has a big work, and this needs a policy brief to be written to them to know that we can also use our local resources, such as the solar. The solar light is our resource. that God has given to us as African, then how do we use it so that we can minimize the cost, minimization of the cost of energy? That should be the focus of the entire globe. If the north, west, east globe is ready to support the south globe, which is Africa, by creating a lot of the solar panel to translate the energy from solar to electricity and any other form, then this is going to lower the cost implication or the burden to the people who are consuming this energy. How do we now use other relevant methodologies to avoid omissions of maybe things such as carbon dioxide, or maybe the vehicle environmental pollution that are into existence. So my check is on the interest of other regions towards Africa, not only bringing them on table to tell them how there's a bigger effect of climate change, but now use the local mechanism to address this issue. But this is going to be hard. The reason is our political leaders are looking at a great idea of using local resources as a threat to their corruption in nature, to their money scandals in nature. They don't want Africa to be independent. They don't want Africa to be free and address this issue as Africa, but they want Africa to be their daily bread for their own regime and their own friends and families. Because these things can be addressed. We have enough tax which we are collecting as our country, but 99% they are getting lost in line with corruption. So let's address major issues that are making us not to be able to run our energy systems or energy bodies, or maybe energy the energy sector. So this thing, we are able to do it by ourselves, but the issue of corruption, individualism, donor dependency, national country donor dependency. African wants to travel to those big countries to learn something, and I don't know, it's called exchange program. Where can they go to the exchange program to Burkina Faso and learn something from Burkina Faso, and then people from Burkina Faso to go to the other part of Senegal and see what Senegalese are doing towards addressing the issue of energy? Why can't they brainstorm amongst themselves as African leaders and look for the solution? Not that they have the solution, then they take it to the interest of maybe the global donors or the global countries. Me, I usually say Russia is a country, just as Kenya, which is a country. The privilege that they have, sometimes it may be because of proper management of resources within their country. That's why they're able to bring it out. How many African countries are ready to manage their resources, their energy sectors? How are they using it? How are they embracing their citizens' effort and taxes that are paying towards ensuring that the issues such as the energy is being addressed? So the conversation needs not to go past the globe. It needs to happen at the national level. And if that is well addressed, then the globe, they can come and support us, but they let them support us in whatever we know we can't do, not whatever we know we can be able to address.
Exactly. It's all about taking the bull by the horn and, of course, taking in place or putting in place tough measures for the greater good of the African continent. Now, back to you, Dr. Fongod. I'll be coming back to you, Felix, but then let me get the opinion of your co-panelists. Dr. Fongod, you listened to what your co-panelist, Felix ORWAKA, had to say as far as that is concerned. But then there was this need once again for a collaborative effort. He re-echoed that in his response for Africans to be able to collaborate amongst themselves, first at a national perspective, then at a regional perspective, before looking at it within the continent or continental perspective, in a bid to quell, or better still address, this energy deadlock on the African continent. Now, what other prospects can Africa explore, given that we have cited the need for collaboration amongst African stakeholders or African nations, be it from nation to nation or better still from region to region, to address this problem? What other prospects, what other solutions could be brought to the table to address Africa's energy crisis?
I think that we really need to start focusing a little bit more on having some kind of a diversified economy. And I think that despite the fact that everything rises and falls on energy, we need to start finding ways in which we get people to actually start investing in energy sectors. Exactly. So if we have people who are building companies whose primary objective is to supply energy, that will be a way in which we move forward. What that means is we have to also begin to understand that there have to be some kind of an infrastructural development on the continent of Africa, especially when it comes to electricity and energy. We have to be able to have this grid basically built up so that we can be able to transport electricity. So if you have a dam, it's somewhere in Cameroon, for example, that has the capacity to generate electricity for West Africa, there has to be the grid. There has to be lines that leaves Cameroon to different parts of these West African countries that we are trying to be able to sell energy to. And so we must be able to build up the grid, build up a robust infrastructure that should be able to carry electricity across, vast distances across the continent. We need to be able to do that. Without us having robust infrastructure, it will be absolutely difficult for us to meet up with the demand for energy going forward. And I think that if that was going to be the case, then we'll realize that we have to also start investing in areas of education, in healthcare. We have to start investing in being able to make sure that we understand where the population is, we understand what's happening in our inner cities, build up robust infrastructure to be able to take care of the inner cities so that we don't always have lights out, because we are basically, so the idea of rationing just simply means we can only, the grid can only support X amount of usage. So we block out one particular part of the city and then we give energy to one particular part of the city, because we cannot do both at the same time. Yeah. And that, to me, it's a little bit crazy. We must be able to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to be able to supply cities at least uninterrupted electricity. I have never, I mean, living out here in the West, there has never been a day that you woke up in the morning and then they tell you that you don't have lights, or basically you just sit and then you don't have lights. That has never happened, except that there's an overpower, you're using too much electricity and your meter basically goes off. If you have too many things connected, that is possible. But just to say that you don't have electricity because the grid is off or something, that is unheard of. And that's just to tell exactly how advanced and how civilized these communities are. We have to be able to make sure that we meet up with the same demands with our people. I don't think that it's something far-fetched to be able to demand that we need an uninterrupted power. We need to be able to have electricity 24/7. There are people living in this country that have CPACs. They have medical devices that without those medical devices they will not survive. And the only reason why they allow them to go home and continue their treatment from home and continue living with these machines in their homes is because we have uninterrupted electricity. That's just the reason why. But obviously, if they were in some third world country, they would probably be living in the hospital where there's a generator, or they might have a generator at home, which is totally not sustainable. I think that we must find ways in which we have these reforms that says and help each and every one of us to understand that there has to be an increased development in all of our grids. If we do not do that, increasingly going forward, as the population also increases, before we start talking about the areas of industrialization, before we start pushing that we need more factories, before we start pushing that we need to be able to get into a lot of manufacturing, all of this demands energy. And if the grid is not ready to provide electricity even for the local population without the influx of all of this technology and machinery, I don't know exactly if we will be able to meet up with the energy demands of the future. We must make sure that we build up a robust grid as it is, and then diversify and get a lot of entrepreneurs into the energy sector.
Exactly, and that is why there is this need for investment in that sector within the African continent. Now, back to you, Felix ORWAKA. You listened to your co-panelist where he reiterated the need for investments in the energy sector within Africa, so these governments can be able to diversify. But then, the need, what could you say about the need for global collaboration? Because earlier on you stated that there is this need for African nations to collaborate amongst themselves, but then they should be very wary of external collaboration. To what extent can Africa tap into external, or better still, a global collaboration for the benefit of overturning its current energy deadlock?
Okay, thank you so much. I think sometimes I do shy off from talking about global when we still have a problem as a continent, but we can't stay or work in ASONG. So we need them. We need to bring a partnership as well as also to collaborate with the global aspect, because one is that as a continent, we are not that perfect. We are growing, being that the effects of the historical injustice that has happened to our country from the colonial aspect of different countries, the different African countries, has really made it hard for all of us just to be in the same space as a continent. Nevertheless, I'm trying to say that for the African continent or African countries to get into a partnership or maybe in a collaboration with the outside the continent partner, all the African countries against exploitation. Because we will say we need energy, somebody will need something in return for the energy that we need in our country. We will need something, they will need more. And if you don't have a framework to rationalize on what is the quantity, let's say we need 20 households to have electricity. These 20 households, how much does it equivalent to the country's maybe GDP or maybe their standards of living? And that leads to one big question, is that Africa should be ready for one currency as well. This one currency unifies everything. I know one thing, the energy sector plays a vital role when it comes to the instrumental growth of the infrastructures within the African continent. Hospital needs ICU beds, ICU sectors. Schools needs laboratories to do research. A lot of institutions, they need this one. But now we can not only just say that because we have a need, we only get out that easy. We need now to have those frameworks. So these frameworks, how does this framework speak to a country that is more under-resourced, that it doesn't feel the burden of paying back the support that they've gotten towards their growth and the development, but that it becomes a plus? Who do you prioritize as African continent to get such a kind of support? I'm pretty sure the situation of Kenya is very different from the situation of electricity in Malawi. Malawi, even their status with the issue of internet is very low. Then how much do we need Malawi to spend to get the energy system working? Then how much do we need for Kenya to get the system working? Why can't they have one negotiation pot, a negotiation pot for African countries to push their agenda, but prioritize on the return for those people who are investing? There's a return for investment that they're making, because they're not giving us this everything for free. Because remember, that is that taxpayers' money that they're investing in Africa. Then what happens to a country that are not able to pay back such a kind of maybe debts that they're getting into. We need just a framework, I will repeat that one, and we need now to make the issue of one currency, so Africa one currency, to help us in guiding our partnership with maybe the global north, east and west, towards supporting the global south, which is Africa as a continent. So we need also, again, we need also to know, what are we trading back? What do we have to offer? Because, okay, we need their support, then what are they getting from us? Then what they're getting from us, we can now push the agenda together and now see on the best way we can now build Africa as a continent, as well as also without training the citizens who are also, or who are already pressed and are going through a lot in their life, in the name that we want to pay back the debt that we took to bring the energy for the citizens.
Thank you so much, Felix ORWAKA. Meanwhile, we will say thank you for that brilliant contribution. Back to you, Dr. Stanley FONGOD. You're one of those that will subscribe to the idea that there should be African solutions to African problems. And earlier on, you cited that Africa should harness the issue of its topography for its own reinforcement. And of course, a co-panelist was citing that Africa should do some sort of re-evaluation of what it has to offer to the rest of the world when dealing with the external collaborators. And now back to our next question. Given we're almost at the end of today's edition of the program, in some 3 minutes, could you chart the way forward for Africa while the continent strives to solve its energy crisis while exploring or tapping into other solutions within the African continent?
Yes, I think that without energy, the future for Africa looks bleak. Without energy, there's absolutely no future. I think that the future will rise and fall on the availability of energy. It is not because we do not have the skill sets to do what we need to do so far as the continent is concerned. We have the skill sets to do what we need to do, and we have what it takes to be able to build robust economies on the continent of Africa. What we need is energy. If you look at the country like Nigeria, she is suffering because she lacks energy. If you look in most parts of the continent of Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, we are in deep trouble because we cannot meet up with the energy demands in sub-Saharan Africa. That being said, we have to be able to build up robust systems on the continent of Africa that will allow us to be able to harness and at least store energy in areas that we have the capacities to do so. If that was going to be the case, then the issues of peace and security on the continent of Africa will absolutely be in play, because most often the times, if you look in places where we have civil wars, folks are fighting, where we have jihadist attacks left and right, especially in places like the Sahel, is because you have a lot of young people who are not working. And so when the job market begins to suffer, a lot of bad things begins to happen. But if you have a place where unemployment is very low, a lot of people are working, nobody has the time to move around and be shooting people, everyone is making money and everybody is happy, I think that we have to be able to make sure that we push forward by making sure we have energy. Energy is the basis for everything. That was going to be the case. I think that we will now have to start looking and finding ways in which Africa has to employ Africans to lead in making sure that the energy sectors on the continent of Africa respect our environment, so that we have friendly, eco-friendly energy sources on the continent of Africa that will respect who we are. Just so we fully understand that windmill technology, it's not the best. All right, solar energy panels has their own issues so far as the environment is concerned. So almost all of these sources of energy which we consider to be green, they have their own issues so far as the environment is concerned. Likewise, dams also create an unhealthy environment for different species, of organisms that we have along the waterway, and it interrupts a lot of things. And so some species get lost as a result of constructing dams. We have to find ways in which we basically move to towards what I consider to be the most effective energy source, which is nuclear. I think that if we get into the nuclear space and then we are able to manage the nuclear space and run it well and have experts on the continent of Africa, even if we have to bring them from outside of the continent of Africa to be able to get us ready, because they have been doing so in a way we are able to preserve and protect our environment, meanwhile expanding the grid and getting young Africans to be able to get into the marketplace without thinking about energy, to be able to do their work in terms of education without.
Bye.